What's up guys, this is OSG and today I'm going to be going over the engine mods in Forza and I'll be explaining what they actually do, because if you look, they don't all look the same. You're often upgrading a different item, different component, or you're entirely replacing the previous components, and each one can add either weight and power or weight and power, which suggests they're not just incremental upgrades, they're actually meant to simulate the idea of modding your car in real life. So we're going to start off with the intake. The first one here is a sort of K&N style or other manufacturer high airflow intake. You generally only get about 1-3 horsepower out of this, but it can sometimes be beneficial to add. It's not going to reduce your weight in any way because it's the same thing, it's just made of a higher quality material which is often also washable. Now this is a cold air intake, the sport intake. Now this extracts air from a colder area of the engine, which allows you to get more power as you can fit more air and fuel into the engine. The more air you can put, the more fuel you can put, the more power you get. Now the race intake here has an extractor which extracts the air from the front of the car. This means the air is directly channeled right in and more air can get in. Basically, the general rule of the intake, the more air you want, the better, because an intake is always the first point where the air goes in. So you've got to get as much as possible at the intake or the engine isn't going to run properly. So moving on, we've also got something called an intake manifold. I'm just going to open my notes right here to say what stuff is going on here. So next is the intake manifold. So there's only a sport and a race in this game. It basically just means it's got larger or lighter. That's a general system when it comes to an intake manifold. Moving on to the carburetor, these things increase power and torque and also can get lighter or heavier as you go along. So if you look here, this one's heavier, but I'll explain why. So this first thing here is an air cleaner. The idea of a carburetor is it mixes the air and fuel and then puts it into the engine. So the air cleaner here, that cleans up the air once it's coming from the intake. And then this here, the sport carburetor, this is basically an upgrade of the entire carburetor. That's why, if you look here, this is actually more power because you actually upgrade the internal mechanisms. You don't upgrade the whole body of it though, because it's the same weight. Now moving on to the raised carburetor, this is just a dual carburetor, so obviously more air and fuel can mix together more efficiently, so it gets better. Now I will just note in this game that the engine mods are not conducive, so adding two together, which would in real life benefit you more than adding another two together, doesn't work. It's just numbers. There's no engine dynamic simulation in this game as far as I know. There is to some extent a torque curve and stuff like that, but there's no actual engine simulation dynamics. So moving on, we've got the ignition here. So this is just a normal spark plugs upgrade. This improves the spark plugs and the relevant cables and power supplies at the top. I don't actually know what these things are called. You can let me know in the comments. I just know that there, the spark plug screws into the bottom and then goes through the cable and down to ignite the fuel. Now there's a race ignition, which as you can see here is often a bit washed out, but it's actually just an ECU remap or a adjustment to the carburetor. So moving on, you've now got the exhaust. So this thing here is known as a catback exhaust. You've got the tube and the mufflers. So this basically is just a higher airflow version of the tube. The mufflers are going to be louder because they don't block as much air to allow more power. Basically the rule of exhaust is the more random crap you have in the middle, like air filters and catalytic converters and resonators, the more backflow there is and the more pressure there is, so air can't leave the car quickly enough. Now this is a full exhaust system. You have got a cat on this one. You've got a smaller muffler and you've got headers which come from the engine and all the relevant piping. And then this one is what's known as a straight pipe. There's no muffler, there's just an exhaust exit there, two pipes and headers. Straight pipes aren't legal in most countries on the road. Now we've got the cams and valves. So you're upgrading, this bit is upgrading the part at the top of the engine which regulates the valves, which allows a certain amount of air or fuel to be mixed based on how much you're accelerating. So the street cams and valves are just the rods. They're the cam rods or cam shafts are all you're upgrading. Now moving along, you've got the wheels as well. Now if you can adjust the size of the wheels, you can increase the RPM, because the faster the wheels spin, the higher the RPM of the engine. And then you've got this, which is not only the wheels and the rods, but it's also the I'll just open my notes here. It's also got upgraded push rods. These are these parts here. As far as I know, these things are called push rods. They might be another component, but I looked at a diagram of cams and valves in a real car. I've looked at diagrams for the engine to make these videos, so as far as I know, those things are meant to be push rods. A lot of the time with these images, it's quite hard to tell what the image actually represents, which is quite annoying. But anyway, moving on. Here we've got the valves. I just need to scroll down on my notes to make sure, in case I mess up, I know what I'm looking at. So here you've got the street valves. These are literally just a valve. I I think it's called the stems, and they've got the little things at the end which block off the point where the fuel or air can get in. And then this here is upgrading the valve size, quite possibly. It's really hard to tell from the image what this has done. Maybe upgrading some part of the push rod, I'm not massively sure. And this might be some sort of electronic injection system. It could also be some sort of cap on the top has been added. It's honestly really hard to tell from these images what the valves are actually doing. But if you look, each thing slightly benefits weight. Now, I don't really see how this would benefit weight that much at all, as these rods are really not going to get much lighter as they're quite small. But, you know, at least it's got some attention to detail. And anyway, yeah. By the way, I'm not going over which mod's the best in this game. I'll link underneath my modifications guide if you guys want to know that. Now, this is the displacement. This is the size of each piston. A lot of people will bore their engines out or increase the stroke to actually increase the size of the combustion chamber. So, if you look here, it's quite hard to tell which is a bore and which is a stroke, and because there's not obvious in the images, it doesn't show any machinery or anything. So, I'm guessing, just from what I would know, that this is a stroke because it doesn't require new pistons. And this here is a bore because a bore would require new wider pistons. But that's just off the top of my head. I'm not massively sure. They might all just be bore and stroke. I'm not sure. I just know that this image is different to these two. These two are the same, so this is really hard to tell the difference on. But moving along, you've got the pistons and compressions. So the lighter the pistons get, these are all just lighter pistons. They're all the same image, but one will be made of like steel, and then maybe a stronger material like titanium, and then maybe carbon. You do actually get carbon pistons. It's kind of a new technology, so there might be different materials. Obviously, Forza doesn't tell you what the materials are, so you wouldn't know, but the lighter the pistons get, or you can get some pistons will allow you to have more stroke and less inertia. Basically, the lighter the pistons get, the less inertia, so the engine is going to be more responsive. Anyway, moving along, we've got the turbo. I'm going to go over the other aspirations as well. So, for the start, you've just got a simple turbo system. Now, the single turbo and the twin turbo are a bit different. These two little parts down the bottom are the waste gates. That's what allows backflow air to get out. So this street is just the installation of the turbo. This here is a bigger turbo and better waste gates, or dump valves, or whatever you call them. And this here is a race turbo, which appears to feature some sort of ECU remap or standalone ECU in the corner. I'll show you supercharger and stuff in a bit. Then you've got intercooler. This is upgrading the cooling system. So this first one is actually the installation of an intercooler. A turbo will work without an intercooler, but not to its maximum efficiency, because the air coming from the turbo might be a bit too hot. But this is the installation of the intercooler with the relevant parts, like the pump and the heat exchanger and piping, stuff like that. And then here is an upgraded intercooler, larger, and then here is possibly an auxiliary, like a double intercooler, because this thing is smaller than this. So I'm guessing this is the introduction of two intercoolers. And then you've got more piping here, so I'm guessing, yeah, that's two intercoolers. And then as for oil and cooling, this is simply the installation of a fan. This here is an installation of quite a lot of things. You've got a pump, I'm guessing right there, for either the radiator or the oil. You've got tubing for the oil, and you've got a little radiator for the oil. That might suggest an upgrade of the radiator for an engine, but that looks like an oil cooling radiator to me. Now here, this thing down here is called the oil pan. It's what the oil sits in at the bottom of the engine, and as it cycles through to lubricate the bottoms of the pistons and the crankshaft. These here are the cables to transport the oil. That's an oil cooler there. I think that's a radiator pump there, and then that might be some sort of filter, I think oil filter or something, maybe transmission oil filter or something like that. And then this thing at the bottom is some sort of junction, I think, to distribute the oil to the relevant path. Now lastly, you've got a flywheel. So you've got stock, street, sport and race. These just get lighter as they go. The lighter the flywheel, the less inertia. Engines always cope better when inertia is less. You never want too much inertia in an engine, because it makes it not responsive, and it can cause power loss. Anyway, moving along, I'm just going to show you the other aspirations quickly. Sorry, that's an engine swap. I'm just going to show you the other aspirations quickly. So we'll move on to positive displacement. If I go to here, same thing. This still needs an intercooler. You've got the installation of one, and then you've got a smaller wheel here, so more revolutions, more compression, and then you've got a larger supercharger here with a smaller wheel, so that's a lot of compression. There's a lot of space in there for air to go through. Now I will show you the last one, which is a centrifugal supercharger, which works a bit different to a supercharger. They both run off the crank. Sorry, I think they run off a crank or a they run off the crank belt or the cam belt, as far as I know. If we go to here, you've got the installation of one here. You've got one with some sort of, I think it's called bypass. I think this might be a bypass valve or something like that. I don't know if a supercharger needs a bypass valve, but I really could not understand what that thing is. But you've probably got a smaller wheel on here as well. As there's no weight change, it's not going to be a bigger one. And then this here, it gets lighter. You've possibly installed a higher performance one made of a lighter material. You've got more tubing here, so that's basically it for the aspirations. I will go over electric cars at the end, but there's only one different mod on electric cars. There's only one engine mod you can do, which is to replace the entire motor and battery system. So moving on, you've got platform and handling. Now with the brakes, this is simply brake pads, brake fluid, and brake lines. This is an upgrade of the entire braking system. So you get the calipers, you get vented discs. This is going to be a bigger disc than is stock and more powerful, maybe more pistons. Better heat dissipation using these vents. And then this one is carbon ceramic, which is the best brake you can get. It's a lot lighter than these. I mean, these brakes are higher performance than sport brakes. They're going to be lighter than the stock brakes. This has no weight savings because you're not really changing much. And then this is going to have the best weight savings because carbon ceramic is a very weight efficient material. So moving on, you've got springs and dampers. Now, as you go along, this is just a better spring. Probably it's stiffer, it's lower. Then again, stiffer and lower. And then here you've got reservoirs and some to adjust the springs. And then this one here is off-road, raised and softened and adjustable again. And this last one here, drift, you've still got the adjusters. It's slammed and it's a lot stiffer to allow you to drift better. You can actually slam some of these cars quite well. Like if you look at this truck, you can slam it 6.22 inches from stock, which is pretty good. Pretty close to the ground there. Anyway, moving along, you've got the anti-roll bars. Now, as you go through, this is probably just a lighter model. This one here is bracketed in some way, braced to the body of the car, and this one is adjustable. I mean, if you're going to modify the car, always pick this one because it's what's best to be able to adjust them. Moving along, you've got the chassis reinforcement and roll cage. Now, this is some sort of support bar. You can't see this inside the car as far as I know, but it quite probably goes between the B pillars behind the driving seat as far as I would guess. It could also be maybe a reinforcement to the boot of the car, inside the boot of the car, or it could be sort of engine seat belt in the engine part of the car. Now, moving along, you've got this chassis reinforcement and roll cage here, which is, again, you've got that bar that goes in one of those places. You've got another bar, which I'm guessing is probably a tail reinforcement, and this crossbar is probably an engine brace there, though it might be a roof brace, though I doubt it because I don't really understand what it will connect to. Now, moving along, this is an entire safety cell. This is often used in racing and required at some tracks. If you look, the drive would get in the lower side, and then the raised side is for the passenger, which wouldn't be used because if you're going to put this in, you probably have had the interior of your car stripped out. But this is obviously going to add a lot of weight, there's a lot of tubing, but it's going to reinforce the entire body of the car because it's the whole part of the car right there. So moving along, you've got weight reduction. As you can tell from the images, I think that's a cup holder you're removing. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're also removing a tyre and the tools to fix the car. So you basically just get rid of all the sort of maintenance bits from the car to fix it while you're driving if it breaks down. But in a racing environment, you've obviously got places to fix the car, like pit stops and stuff like that if anything goes wrong. Now moving along, you've got sport weight reduction, which is a removal of the stereo system and the speakers, the subwoofer there. And then race weight reduction, you strip the whole car down to a chassis, you put lighter parts everywhere, no non-essential parts in the car. That's basically what a race weight reduction is. So now I'm going to move on to drivetrain. Sorry, my voice is getting tired from talking too much. You've got the clutch upgrade, so this is just a standard clutch. If you look, there's a little plate there, so I'm guessing this is a twin plate clutch, and then this is a triple plate clutch. You can see the 3 plates right there. There's a little weight saving between them, which is a bit weird, seeing as you're adding more clutches, but it's a bit strange. You're adding not more clutches, but more friction plates. It's all the same clutch. So you've got these transmission upgrades. Now, I've never really understood this, because it doesn't do anything. Like it doesn't put any noticeable change, though it does seem to increase your handling, acceleration, launch, and I don't honestly understand it myself, but apparently it does something. All you're upgrading is the stick and the fluid, and then moving along, you got the sport transmission. you're upgrading the internals of the gearbox, and this is an entirely new gearbox. You can fit all your own gears, gear ratio adjustments, and this is just final drive adjustments because you can put your own input shaft. So moving along, you've got the drive line. Now this is the shaft that connects the engine to the back or front wheels. For some reason it displays the same thing if your car's front wheel drive, as far as I know, or all wheel drive, even though different sort of shafts and axles are used for different things. A shaft needs to connect the engine to the rear, or a rear engine to the front. But anyway, that's basically all it is for the shaft. They're just made of lighter materials to reduce rotational mass. This one might be steel, and then aluminium, and then carbon, which will also increase stiffness, stuff like that. I mean, stiffness isn't really simulated in this game. This game's not super realistic. The physics are realistic, and it's still call it a simulation game, but it's not like automation where the engine dynamics are actually simulated, or like BeamNG, stuff like that. Definitely hasn't got soft body physics in this game. Anyway, you've got differential here. So this first thing here is a one-way differential. This basically goes from a completely open differential to a slightly locked differential on your acceleration. And then you've got 1.5 where you can adjust the acceleration. And then you've got a full differential where you can adjust both. I'd always recommend selecting this one because there's no reason to select another one. There's no PI difference between them, so you always select this one. And now moving along, you've got the rally and drift and off-road diff. Now these are all just the same thing as the two-way. You can just change anything there. It's just a preset if you don't want to tune your differential though. Tuning a differential in this game is not that hard. Now the tyre compound, you're upgrading the actual tyre. It not only upgrades the compound but also the tread pattern. Now Forza's been a bit lazy and shared tread patterns between some of the tyres, which is a bit strange. I don't know why they've done that, but you kind of get the idea on how it's working. Moving along, you've got the tyre width, pretty obvious, widens the tyres and rims. If you look, I can increase the tyre width to an extent. Putting a wide body will allow you to have wider tyres, and we'll also have wider tyres right off the start. As soon as you install the wide body, you're going to get wider tyres. Anyway, in terms of your rim style, this is just the wheels. I mean, I don't know why it calls them rims, because they're not rims. I mean, I consider the rim this outside part of the wheel, and then the whole thing is the wheel. But I don't know why it calls them rims in this game. Maybe because it's marketed to maybe slightly younger people who still call them rims. But I think we can all agree they're called wheels. Moving on, you've got the rim size. This is just bigger wheels. And then you've got track width, which isn't on this car, but it basically just puts spacers between the wheel and the axle to push the wheel out. Now, or nearly last one here, we've got the bumper upgrade. So this adds a front splitter and canards on some cars. So this car doesn't have canards. It also has a tow hook on some cars. This car doesn't need a tow hook for some reason, despite the fact it's a truck. And then you've got remove. This is one of the stock options you can add. A lot of them allow you to remove or add a front bumper, or to add an aftermarket bumper, stuff like that. Then if we move on, you've got the rear wing. So you've got a little ducktail on this car. You can also have a chassis mounted or trunk mounted, or on some cars I think it's called like a wicker bill, which is a different kind of a ducktail or a fin, or whatever this thing's called. I don't understand all the names for different spoilers, but there's a few available models in this game. Some of them are aftermarket, some are adjustable. Some of them are just spoilers, some of the wings, everything like that. The difference between a spoiler and a wing is a wing creates downforce by pushing air up behind the car. A spoiler simply reduces the drag and creates downforce by preventing by sort of directing air. They're a bit different. The wings are often higher in general. So in terms of your bumper, you can generally just remove or add. There's sometimes aftermarket models. And then your side skirts are on the sides of the car. Now this isn't adding side skirts, it's adding tyres. But generally, if you change the side skirt, you're going to be reducing the drag because it's often lower to the ground. Now I don't really understand how adding a wheel is going to reduce drag, but this is Forza, not real life. Some cars have a hood upgrade. You can cut a hole in the hood, or have a cow hood, or have a sort of scoop or stuff like that. It doesn't actually make a difference to the engine performance, whether you vent the engine or scoop air in or whatever. And what's quite funny is it's completely useless, because in most cars the intake is at the front, so adding a scoop there isn't really going to do anything. And there's no intercooler there either, so the scoop's largely unnecessary. Now the last thing I'm going to show you is an electric car. So if we go to my cars here and then get an electric car, I'm going to go for the Jaguar because it has 2 engine swaps. In the only way an electric car has engine swaps. If I find a Jaguar here and then I go to it, get in car, and then I go to custom upgrade, and in here motor and battery. So this first one here, that there is your battery as far as I can tell, and then that there is your controller at the front, and then these cables. I've got a little note on what the last part is because I cannot remember it off the top of my head. I've done a lot of research into what these parts are because I do not know them off by heart. As far as I know, also you don't have a street one. It's just sport and race for electric cars. I haven't added any cars with 3 engine upgrades. But anyway, so as far as sport, you get your battery and converter. So this thing is a DC converter as far as I can tell. That's the thing I couldn't remember what it was. And then the last thing, that's a motor there. That's your motor upgrade. You've got dual battery upgrade, which is why your car, which is a bit weird because your car doesn't get any heavier. If you have more batteries, your car's generally going to get heavier. But this is Forza again. I don't know what's wrong with it. Then you've got your converter there, your controller, and your cables. So same as this, but with dual batteries and a motor. So thank you for watching, guys. That's about it for this video. This took me quite a long time to make. I did a lot of research for this. I know the delivery and the way I was talking this video wasn't that good, but I didn't really want to have to edit too much on this video, so I've kind of tried to do it all in one take. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed this. Bye, guys.